I know now that we never get over great losses. We absorb them, and they carve us into different, often kinder creatures. Gail Caldwell.
Bending, Not Breaking. Season 7, Episode 2. Korra Alone. And welcome back to another episode of Bending, Not Breaking. I am Sunshine.
And I'm Ben.
And we have an episode today.
It's so
prior
good.
to watching this, I didn't remember how juicy this episode. Like, there's so much to unpack, and we only have like an hour, and so we don't have a lot of time for what is arguably, I'm going to put it easily in the top 10 of all Avatar episodes of all time.
Hands down.
Phenomenal episode. And so let's talk Korra Alone. But before we do that, to do it well, we've got to bring in some extra folks in to help out. And so, Ben, can you tell me who we've got with us today?
I sure can. Y'all, we have a friend of the pod who has just deigned us with their presence, given us another opportunity to have an incredible conversation. It is my pleasure to welcome Indhira Udofia back. Indhira. There it is. We, for those of you who have not heard,
third co-host at this point. We're just locking Indhira in for all of the rest of them.
Yeah.
As much as I can, I love talking about my queen, but I especially love being here today. So thank you so much for inviting me. This is the one to bring me in on.
Yeah, I'm feeling it. So for last time we checked in with you, we were like, doctoral candidate, we're here. And then you were like, not Clay. But I think we can officially say that today
it's
doctoral.
Official. Yes, I am waiting on IRB. We are all but dissertation. It's wonderful over here. We're almost done, y'all.
That's incredible. Oh,
so close.
I'm so proud. I'm so proud. Maybe one day though. Who knows? I have to graduate my master's programs first. We'll see.
And I am never going to grad school ever. So we can't speak in absolutes, but like
tossing it around for a good 6 months.
We're pretty sure.
Good for you, because grad school is a lot like this episode. So
cool. Constantly seeing dark shadow versions of yourself and being scared all the time. Great, love it. Just constant trauma. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Well, it is a meaty episode, and so probably should just jump into it. But before we do that,
you know what's coming.
I don't want to. 30-second recap.
I want you to, though. I think it's really lovely.
Okay.
And whenever you're ready, I can go ahead and give you a countdown if you want.
Put the time on the clock. Let's do it.
On your mark. Get set. Go.
Korra sees a dark version of herself in the alley, or shadow version of herself in the alley, and tries to fight it, but it disappears. And then we cut back to 3 years earlier when she's leaving Republic City. We get to see her go through a healing process with Korra. We get to see her continue to grow and struggle with that. And then she finally starts sparring people and realizes she's still getting beat frequently. She goes on a little journey throughout the Earth Kingdom and gets beat up some more. Finds a way into a underground fighting ring, goes and gets led into the swamp by a spirit and meets Toph. Boom. Yeah.
It's always masterful. Every time you all do this, I'm always amazed.
I just try to say what happens in 30 seconds, and it's Korra gets beat up a lot this episode and then meets Toph. That's
how do I narrow
this? I start with that framework, and then I work outwards of say what can I throw in
30 seconds. I love it though. It's always amazing. I'm like, wow.
You heard it from the winner here, y'all. The one who does the 30-second recaps best. We should just have Sunshine do it from now on. What do y'all think?
Wrong.
I like when you try to get there.
Sharing the wealth.
Like when you try. Oh no.
Oh man. No, you do great. Both of you do equally as well. So I'm not doing it, so that's all that matters.
All right, here.
All right.
Okay. So
Okay.
one of the things we haven't really talked about the lens we're diving into this episode with. We've talked about how like intense it is, but we haven't really landed on how we're going to be talking about it and the lens through which we watched. And so, Indira, can you tell us about the lens you chose and then give us some background on what it means?
Yeah, so I chose the lens recovery. Um, I First of all, there's so much in this episode that points to a lot of different ways, but at its core, this is a example of what post-traumatic recovery looks like. We see so much in this episode of Korra navigating stages of grief. We see so much of Korra navigating identity post event. And so much of that is tied up in what we think when we're thinking of trauma recovery. For those who don't kind of know, trauma is just any type of event that has had an impact on your physical, emotional, or psychological well being. And so when we're thinking about trauma's impact on the thing, it not only like impacts our physical stuff with scars and bruises, as evident by Korra's kind of physical presentation during the episode, but then there's these emotional and psychological lingering prints, right? I often liken trauma recovery to getting size for your eyeglasses for the first time. These events are the things that cloud our vision and make things blurry, that we're not able to perceive things as equally or as freely as we can. And so what we are seeing is Korra getting an eyeglass test to understand how she can see the world differently post this event.
And what's interesting about that too is that this is a long process, right? And it's not something where like, you get tested, you check your eyes, and now all of a sudden I can see more clearly. It's like like this is one of those things where like this happens over years, right? And it's really fascinating to think about how this example shows us that recovery isn't just a like light switch on off, like I'm recovered, great, we're all better now. That's not how it works. It's showing us that it takes time, which is really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's what makes this series so beautiful. This what makes this season so beautiful, and this episode, because we do not get a resolution. At the end, there's no nice night, this nice neat bow. And I even think Korra has this expectation, like once I can walk, I am fixed. Once I can, fight, I am fixed. And it's like, no, this is going to change how you're moving through this world altogether. And I think that is at its core why this episode is so indicative of the recovery process.
So, so I'm recovery is a loaded word for me. I have a lot of questions around this because if you look at the textbook definition for this, it's a quote return to a quote normal state of health, mind, and strength. And I have a lot of questions around that because I'm not sure I buy into it. I think that's not necessarily what recovery has to be, right? And so I'm curious if you could speak to that and help us kind of grapple with the idea of what's the I guess connotation of most mainstream believing like that you can get back to the exact place you were beforehand, right? And does that make sense? Can you?
Yeah, no, because you never get back to who you are.
That's what's normal.
Also no, there's no normal. What is
Right.
normal? Like I think when I am using or evoking the name or the term recovery, I'm thinking of it from a thing of a return to discover who you are, right? So it is you know, it would be like a rediscovery, right? And so that kind of post-traumatic repair or post-traumatic recovery is about how do we come back to understanding, defining, and reinterpreting ourselves post this event. Who, as someone who has a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, I will never be the person I was before experiences of my abuse. I will never, that Indira that I was back before I was in that relationship, that Indira that I was before I encountered, the harms that I've encountered, I couldn't re-access that person even if I tried, right? Because and this is why I use the eyeglass test. Something about that has fundamentally shifted how I see and move through this world.
Yes.
I will always have an altering of my vision and my perception post this event. It is completely warped the field, shaped, whatever language you want to use around the visual field. Yeah. I'm a lot sharper. I'm a lot tender. I'm a lot more sensitive to certain things. And so part of my recovery or repair process is giving myself permission to be reintroduced to me, right? Mm-hmm. Who is this person now that I've had this event? Who is this person now that I've learned the lessons that I've learned in healing from this event? So even who I was at the start of the injury is far different than who I am 5, 6, 7 years post-event, because I've had to relearn, grieve, and reimagine myself multiple times over and over again during this healing process.
One of the things that I really love about the definition that comes from the textbook is not the initial one, but the secondary one, which is not one that I was looking at when I initially thought was when I watched this episode. And the secondary definition is the action or process of regaining possession or control of something stolen or lost. And that action, the process part of it was one that I was like, oh my God, that's it. Like that was the thing that resonated when I was able to watch this episode, was that process part of it. And I think that that's a super important differentiation between just like, oh, returning to normal. Like, no, it's that process and learning of growth to get back something that was taken from you through that traumatic event. And so I love seeing, that was the first time I saw that definition for recovery, and I was like, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, and I think that I'm actually going back to the opening quote that we utilized. Like, it's not that when those losses happen, we then regain and then we're back to this quote normal. It's the way that they worded it was we absorb them, they carve us into something different. And, often after quote the whatever we're calling the recovery process, we often emerge with more wisdom, more kindness, more empathy, which is really an interesting conundrum. And that's not at all to condone getting, hey, everybody go get hurt so you can recover. But it's one of those things where it's really interesting to think about how recovery processes shape us.
I'd like to liken it to this idea of, if we think of our psyches, heart, energy, soul, whatever language is indicative of a totalizing landscape of self, right? When harm happens or when trauma happens, right? Going through the process of recovery and repair, right, means that what you're doing is assessing the landscape of your heart, right? And so one of the things that I've used in trauma and my trauma work is, instead of us just navigating the grief cycles from, the kind of crib cycle of assault, of sadness and depression and loss and bargaining, I asked them, how has grief changed the cartography of your heart, right? Like, if you were to draw a map of what your heart looks like now, what shifts has the process of harm and grief caused to shift the landscape? And I think this episode is a great example of that, as Korra is in the spirit world, walking around, trying to kind of reimagine her relationship to the spirit world now that Rava is no longer present.
It's just so beautiful. Oh God.
So let's dive in. There's a lot of meat and not a lot of time, and so let's jump in straight into the conversation.
Yes.
the first question that came up for me as I was watching this episode is the cut back to the 3 years when we see that she is leaving this community that she's built, these people, and I don't know if it's because of this, like, you need to be with family, you need to be home, but I found it very strange that for her to heal, the advice was to leave this group of people that you have bonded with and loved. And so, how does community and the community we create lend itself to the healing process and to that recovery process?
So I think it's both, right? Like I think, and this is why I think Korra's process lasted longer than probably it should have, right? Um, because community is important because they are mirrors, right? That reflect you back to you. And also you have fundamentally shifted. So part of the grieving process or the recovery process is being able to articulate what this new you looks like and what your new needs are back to your community so that they can care for you and show up for you in ways that are effective, right? I think some of the kind of old expectations and the reason why Korra had to leave is like, in order for me to be able to communicate to you what this Korra needs, I've got to actually figure out who Korra is now that I don't have this thing, right? And so there's something special about being able to go back to the ancestral lands from which you came, to the waters of the temples of your familiar, in order to wrestle with what has fundamentally changed, right? There is, her friends only know her as Avatar Korra. And as much as we understand and we can respect, right, that they've only seen, they don't know Korra in diapers, right? My mother is able to see me in a way that all of my seminary homies and friends cannot. It is just a thing, right? There are just certain things where my mother can literally listen to something in my voice and be like, what's it? What's wrong? Right? My brother will call me and say, like, I had a tingling. Your mind is doing something. What's going on? Right? And that's something that sometimes people of family of creation, unfortunately, because they've met you in a certain season, may not know that part of you, right? And so while family of creation is important and they can hold space and do the work and give you latitudes, there is something beautiful about being able to be reconnected to the lands and the practices of your familiar, of the temple of your familiar, to help you get back to you. It's just one of those things where, like, there's no right or wrong way to handle things. And for those who don't have, or whose connection to our families of origins are severed, it does not mean that then you don't have processes to heal. I want to name that, because home is complicated. Korra can go back home because home is not a complicated narrative for her. You know, other people, home is the site and source of injury, and so they need to leave and create sanctuary and oases in other places. And so I think, you know, there's something beautiful about that, though, that if you can go back to people who know you before you were the best idealized version of you, it's a beautiful thing to be able to kind of reimagine together what that looks like.
I also want to go to that you said both, right? It can be both. And I think that we see Korra needing both over this episode, which is again a three-year span of time, right? And the thing that really stuck out to me, Indira, and what you were talking about was this idea of Korra doesn't, I think it's not just that her friends in Republic City, her community in Republic City doesn't know her outside of being the Avatar, but I don't think Korra knows herself outside of being the Avatar.
Absolutely.
And this injury, this process has essentially taken her Avatar capacities away. She can no longer reach the Avatar state. She can no longer reach Rava. She's no longer able to do the physical requirements that the Avatar asks and begs of its, body. And so it's one of those things where like I think she has experienced profound grief and loss over who she thinks she is outside of being the avatar. And so it's really interesting to think about, like, I think there was a lot of shame in staying with that community. And I think it hurt more for her to be present with them, knowing that the story she was likely telling herself is that I'm no longer who you know me to be. And so I think there's just a lot of pain, and sending her away probably offered her a little bit of respite from that.
It's almost like this entire episode, she is chasing that normal that we talked about that doesn't exist. I'm getting back to the normal, even though that might not even have been the best version of Korra, right? Like that, like she's trying to get back to that spot. And it's not possible. You've been changed forever. Glinda from Wicked, whatever it might be. Like, you've been changed, and there's no going back. But that doesn't mean you can't be better than that version. That doesn't mean that you can't be healthier than that version, or that this new you that exists isn't possible. But that's what she's trying to latch on to. And so I want to talk to, do we think that Katara does a phenomenal or non-phenomenal or like messy or bad job of like supporting Korra through that initial healing process? Like, what are the things that Katara does that, like, yes, latch onto that, or no, like, throw that away and don't do that to someone?
I think Katara is an example of how sometimes I think Katara's kind of interactions with Korra represents how helpless we can feel in co-journeying with someone through trauma. We have practices and insight. We can offer compassion and care, which she does. That's wonderful. Mwah. If the person is not ready to commit to the process of letting go of what their roadmap of healing looks like, there's nothing we can do. And so I think a lot of the kind of like anger, I think Katara does a good job of holding anger. But even as someone who's like a therapist who like tends to hold a lot of people's anger, I can see, like, there's moments where I'm like, I can see Katara wanting to fix this and forgetting that this process, that being a conduit of healing means that you don't fix the things, you're just a container for the things to be fixed. So when we were talking about lenses, I originally almost went with the redemption lens because of this idea of another cartoon that I had watched, Wendell and Wilds, and there's a moment in the scene in which they have to go into what's called the redemption chamber, and in this is like literally the protagonist is understanding that her wounds or her traumas, right, have to be embraced in order for it to not poison her being, right? And so that kind of harrowing process is very akin to what we're seeing, right? Because as you said, that chasing back to normal, there's a reason why the shadow avatar Korra has chains on it. It's a prison, right? That warrior is actually the thing that entraps, that would be the thing that imprisons her forever in her own mind. And so being able to not kind of liken it to, let's get you back to Avatar, right? The function is to get you back to being the Avatar, and more about, I'm just here to hold space for you to figure out who you are. I think that is kind of partly where Katara kind of falters, is because in and of its core, I think everybody has the hope that they can keep the Avatar alive. And instead of focusing on, if Korra could never do it, can Korra be okay?
So I want to actually ask about this. So the specter that is Avatar Korra, the shadow avatar, whatever language we're utilizing here, I'm curious as to what we really think that is. Where is this, like, because I think a layperson might see this and be like, Korra's crazy, right? Korra is seeing people. Korra is it, right? And I find it really intriguing that the other spirit animal can see it as well. And that changes like, oh, I'm not, that kind of changes what I think this is. And so I'm curious for both of you, really, like in your eyes, like what does this represent? What is it? I'm you know.
So I don't know if I have the answer to that, but the one thing I do love about this moment is how powerful it illustrates when someone else can validate what you are going through, life changing, like life changing. And so like that moment right there is just like, oh, oh, beautiful, beautiful. Other answers, no idea. That moment, tears, right? Like, but
I love your honesty. Like, I have no idea what that's about, but love the validation I experience. I've thought about this, and I've kind of posited. I've even played with musings in my journal. I don't know if it'll ever manifest as an article, but one thing we know about Korra is Korra only has one way of knowing how to navigate adversity, and that's fight her way out. And I think the the shadow avatar or the or the poisoned avatar, right, is talking about the poisonous nature of fight only, right? Like it is the poison nature of the warrior way, right? That this is something that you have to not only gain some awareness and acceptance to, but you can't fight and battle it because it's a part of you. This season, right? This portion, this guilt, right? That is chained to what the avatar is, right? That has been locked or lost is not something that needs to be combated, but maybe something that needed to be embraced. And so I've always thought of it as Korra facing all the old ways to which she has fought her way through and understanding that way is not, she's not that person anymore. She's not the same warrior. She's not the same person. So every time the old way or the old normal that she's chasing rises up, she's battling it because she realized that she can't be that person anymore.
So one of the things that I'm thinking about and like with this too is there are like talking about this with someone else is like it's no wonder that Cora's like, I'm not gonna like, do you see this? Like she's not like there is no there's a lot of stigma around seeing things and delusion. And it's one of those things where, there's a lot of possibilities. This could be a chemical symptom of having poison in her blood, right? This could be a manifestation of biopsychosocial manifestations of the things that she's processing, right? And it could be there is a suggestion here that there's a spiritual component to this, right? With something spiritual being able to see it also. And so for the people who have eyes to see it, it's one of those things where it is present to be seen. And it's one of those things where if you're not aware and present, you can't see it. And I guess I'm thinking about the metaphor here of when you are both cognizant of what's going on and you can see what's going on from an outside perspective, and the difference of being not knowing what's going on and seeing it and having to figure it out and process it on your own. And it just reminds me of like a therapeutic alliance in a way of like, hey, I see this, and like you see this, and then having to both kind of navigate how to like, I can only lead you right into the swamp. You have to follow and you decide, right? It's this really interesting like metaphor for me there of what can happen when you like see quote someone.
And I think this is why this is my favorite episode, because there's like a lot of different types of like fantasy mythos that have um similar kind of iconography, like only those who have touched a certain aspect of harm violations or death can see death, right? And so this is a very similar, those who have been traumatized, right, or who have experienced the hardships of trauma, knows trauma when it sees it. We know when someone is activated. We know when someone is, we know how it presents and manifests itself. So it's easier for us to be able to see things that maybe someone who has not experienced the same level of harm or hardship experiences. And so I think a lot about the fact that in the spirit world, right, they have seen all types of horrors. Right, they have seen the best of things and the worst of things, and so it's not confusing why the spirit person, aka spirit dog, sees what's happening in ways that people who have not had that type of moral injury have been able to see it.
Yeah.
So, which kind of brings me, so here's a question. The spirit pretending to be a dog, some might call it deceitful, some might, that illusion. How does that play into the healing process? Like, do the ends justify the means in lying to someone to get them to a place that may be beneficial? Or how do we feel, or is the process important too, in that trust being broken isn't beneficial to building a healing or leading someone to recovery? And so how do we feel about that? Because that's the one place for me where I'm like, and they even address it in the show, because they're like, well, would you have come if I wouldn't have done that? And she's like, fair. But I'm like, is it fair? And I don't know. I'm rumbling with that.
Yeah, I think so. I laughed at that point because there are some times in the therapeutic process, right, where we scaffold certain types of interventions to get people to a stage of acceptance or readiness to change. So sometimes my clients have, laughed and been like, hey, you tricked me into touching this thing. I thought we were good. And it was like, we were always going to be here. Like, whether or not you knew we were coming here, I've talked to you about consent, and we don't have to touch it all the way, but we were always going to the swamp. The swamp is where we were going. Now, whether or not you choose to journey in the swamp, now that I've led you to the borderland, is on you, right? There's still agency and choice. As soon as we realize, like, hey, we in the spirit world now, it's time for you to go to the swamp, Korra could have been like, absolutely not. Take me back. And that would have been well within her right. But I think sometimes we don't know where we're going. We don't know, if we don't know the outcome, we won't be prompted to make the risk to go, right? And so I think that metaphor of the dog is like saying, like, hey, spirit, I call him spirit dog. Spirit dog is, hey, I see you. We see you. We all know this is happening. Now, you could let your ego continue to block your process, or you could just be open to the process. And instead of battling it, go with it and see what's on the other side. I'm not doing the work for you. I'm just presenting you another path to get what you want, which is your healing, however you have named that for yourself.
And I think it's really important that it's a swamp. Like, it's not something that everybody wants to go into, like, this is a place that is muddy and smelly often and gross. And I think that's an apt metaphor. It's like, I don't want to go there, but sometimes you do. Like, it's the cave you do not wish to go into is the cave you must enter, right? It's going into the Star Wars situation. Yoda.
I don't think that was Yoda, but
Isn't it Yoda? To Luke, you must enter the cave.
No, maybe.
I'm sure it was.
That feels very Yoda, but I don't know. It's been a while. I'm on anime right now, so I've got to go return.
Star Wars is not my territory. I should stay out. Anyway, I am thinking about another through line that I'd like to visit if possible. I'm thinking about, we talked about Katara's language and words. I want to visit Tenzin for a minute. There are two moments where Tenzin has words with Korra, and the first one is, hey, I don't want you to have to worry about anything in Republic City. We got it handled. I handled this. Here's how. I handled this. Here's how. You don't have to worry about anything. You just focus on recovery. Right. And then later, when they meet again, Korra is like, I can spar. Watch me fight. I got this. And then she doesn't. She's not able to follow through. And Tin's like, there's no shame in taking the time you need. And he goes on to say a few more words. And it's really interesting to me because I hear judgment in Tenzin's language. And the first instance is, I'm taking things off your plate so you don't have to, is one of those things where that sounds comforting, but also like I think about certain forms of therapy where like part of the recovery process is giving people responsibilities so that they have something to take care of and look forward to and create, like, well, if I don't do it, who will? And I'm not sure what's helpful for Korra in this moment. Clearly, it's more complex than one thing. But I'm thinking about this the second time too, where Tenzin's language is asserting that you will recover and be able to do these things, right? And when you do, everything will be back to normal. So like it seems as though Tenzin is in this framework of returning to normal as well in his language. And I'm curious if that like resonated for you all too. If did you hear that differently? I'm curious how Tenzin's language landed for you.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think Tenzin represents, right, is just how sticky it is to support people when you don't know what's going on, right? Like, and using and going kind of to your thought pattern around different treatment models, right? This is part of my, and let me go ahead and put on my little foil cap. This is why evidence-based practices sometimes weaponize people's healing. Um, just because something is kind of the standard way of healing doesn't mean that healing is going to work for that particular person. And sometimes we find that we use certain treatment modalities like CBT or DBT as these magic bullets that are going to fix everybody who has a certain type of presentation. And then we work it out in the session and it does not do the things we say it does, right? Even someone as me who's trained and certified in a certain type of getting certified in a certain modality, even I know that that modality does not work for every single person who has a certain type of diagnostic presentation, right? There's a lot of different things that can help people either connect or disconnect, right? And so because of that, I can't use this kind of like standard kind of like, well, take all the time you need because you'll get better, because again, the roadmap gets sticky, right? I think even from a good place, we have to be careful about how we dictate what healing and recovery looks like on the other side for another person, because that expectation is the main thing that is keeping Korra chained during this entire healing process, is trying to chase this poisoned avatar state.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. My last thing is potentially a big old can of worms. So forgive me, but I am gonna do it anyway. I have been grappling recently with the violence of cure, of recovery, and thinking about recovery expectations and cure as having really problematic surrounding things that are all around it. And I'll give a little bit of context. When I think about the United States in particular, and even North Carolina, where I am from, there is a lot of history around eugenics. And eugenics is a really interesting concept for those of you who may not be aware of it, who are listening, but it's essentially like this faux scientific process of I'm going to cleanse the human race to be perfect. And the way we're going to do that is by, saying that anybody with disability, anybody that is poor, anybody that is gay, anybody that is black, anybody that is non-white, heteronormative, etc., name all the things. How do we get rid of them so that in 3 generations we can cleanse everything? And it was the same motivation behind like Hitler trying to get rid of the Jews in the Holocaust. And in a way, that was seen as a form of cure of I'm going to make things better. I'm going to help things, quote, return to what it should be or mold it and shape it into what should be. And that is on a mass scale. And if we shrink that down, anytime we think about curing something, we are talking about eradication. We're talking about how do I get rid of this abnormality? And the reason the recovery process is often so grief-filled is because we are now trying to eradicate disability. We're trying to eradicate Korra's experience of who she is at this point. We're saying that that's not okay. And we need to make sure that we erase any form of person who is struggling, right? We need to get them to a point where that's not okay, where they are, quote, okay. And I'm really kind of leaning into the complexity here because like I like being healed. I like feeling like I'm well, but also the world is not always that tidy, right? There are people who are struggling, who have disability, who are struggling, and the world is not built for them. And we're constantly trying to cure disability. And if you talk to, for instance, you think about the autism community, people would say that they're doing just fine, right? I am okay doing exactly as I am. And yet there's a whole host of people who are trying to, quote, cure autism and thus eradicate autism, right? And so it's anyway, all of that to say is I have a really complicated relationship with cure because of this, because of what it does to our expectations and our societal thought processes around difference. And so I'm curious, in this reflection of this episode, this was very present for me. And I was like, what's being erased by pushing Korra to recover? And I'm curious what that kind of opens up for both of you in terms of all of that. That was a lot. And I'm sure both of you have probably heard of at least part of this at some point, but thoughts?
I mean, so one of the things I hear in that is it almost returns to that initial issue that we had with the definition of recovery, which is return to a normal state. And so instead, it's not maybe a return to, but like it's almost like assimilate to the societal normal state. And that's what's deemed as acceptable. That's what's deemed as you're cured. As opposed to our ideas around no, like you get to you're you just want like do you to be the best you, and what that looks like and what healing is going to look different to every single person. And so if you are trying to, all right, because I'm not the expert here, and so I think I'm wording just my feelings on it. The idea around we're going to cure you or we are going to cure this thing versus we are going to create the best environment for you to be able to navigate your own healing process to the best of your ability, I think are two very separate things. And the front is what I hear when I hear like we're going to cure this versus like what I view as the way Katara is kind of like, hey, I can guide your healing process. I can be a part of it, but I can't do it for you. Can't and take that even a step further. Like I can't even define that for you. And so I think that's intent as much, there's always an argument of like intent versus impact, and impact is certainly important, but sometimes intent is important as well. And so ultimately I think that's what it brings up for me when I think through this process.
Yeah. I think I think part of the challenge, right, is that our language is so limiting, right? This goes back to like, you know, trauma in and of itself touches a piece of the ineffable for me. Like there's just a part of how I understand harm and violence and trauma that I can't there that language just has no words for. It's a soul wound, right? There's just it's a sigh. It's a exhale. It's a cry. It is visceral, it is carnal, and is ineffable. And so even when we're thinking about cure and healing, there's a part of that that just is limited because of the language. And so as we are thinking about, stuff, everyone has different definitions of what that means. For Korra, I think it is tied to that first definition. I got to get back to who I am. I gotta get up. I gotta be a fighter. I gotta connect to the avatar state because I got heads to roll and I got people to save, right? And and also in this kind of invitation with Katara and even with the spirit guides, right? The question is curious curiosity, right? It's who are you now, right? And what do you need now in order for you to feel connected, to feel care, to feel support? Um, I and in that there's a tension, right, about what does that end up looking like or meaning in real time. I think i think we all want at our core to feel something familiar, and if we have fundamentally shifted and changes, it is not easy to be strangers to ourselves. And also society makes it almost inherently impossible for us to not have moments of infamiliarity. We have Facebook memories and Instagram memories. We have, kind of like everything is stored, everything is curated. So it's harder and harder to teach people because we have these curated expectations about who we are. And the minute we step out of those expectations, we have to rebrand ourselves all over again. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. It's reminding me of the quote, the Heidi Priebe, I always say her name wrong, quote where when we love someone, what we're basically saying is we're committing to attending all of the funerals of who they were, right? And as we invite people into change and being in relationship with them, they become something new. And with that is the grief and loss of who they once were is lost. And that's what kind of love is, right? It's the acknowledgement and commitment to the process of change and being willing to walk with you through that change. And I butchered her quote, but it's I guess I'm paraphrasing it. um yeah, it's just really interesting. And just briefly, it's reminding me of the difference between the various quote like models that people utilize, like the medical model of like you have cut, I heal cut, you now fixed. And like it's again this return is the medical model using that language, and then there's like social models, and then there's a bunch of models to consider. But often in our culture, especially, the medical model is the predominant framework of this return. Like when you are hurt and you need to recover, and that's the expectation versus, hey, you're hurt, you are still perfectly enough and lovable and exactly who you need to be in this moment of pain than you were when you were not. And I think that's the message that I think is missing is you are perfectly acceptable and not only acceptable but welcome in your pain, just as you are when you are in your eyes healed. And I think that's, if there's a message that I could convey to people, is that even in this pain, like I just want Korra to know, like I just want to sit down and talk to Korra and be like, listen, you are still lovable and the world cares about you and your friends care about you and I care about you. even in this moment right now. You know, like that's all I just wanted to know that.
Yeah, I often thought, what would I do if Korra was sitting with me for therapy this episode? And I think if I was Korra's therapist and I was at the swamp waiting for her to show up, right? Which Toph kind of ends up being a version of that. Um, I think I would just ask her, I think I would allow her to be angry. I think part of this is allowing her to have a container for a rage where she has no worries about what the consequences of that rage looks like.
Of course you're angry. It makes sense that you're
It makes
please
sense.
be angry. Yes, it's healthy to be angry in the face of what you've experienced.
Like it is okay. You have gone through worlds and worlds and worlds of just undue pressure for such a young age because I think we often forget Cora is still a teenager in the midst of all of this. My high school mind could not manage season one. Season one, I would have been done. Right.
It's actually interesting. I think went at present time, I
She's
think
in her
she
20s,
touched
right?
21.
21.
At the start, so 3 years ago, she was whatever,
That's 19.
19. Yeah. 21, 20, 19. I can count.
She was what, 16 at the start of season one?
Yeah. So, over the like, so but even still, like, our brain's still not fully developed, y'all.
Still
Mid 30s,
25.
I'm struggling with all this, right? Like mid 30s, I'm still like it's trauma over and
Mhm.
over again, over and over again. Cora is dealing with all these things and never really coming to solutions in her own healing for season one or for season two,
That's what I was gonna
and
say.
now an assassination attempt. Like, you, what are we
And
talking about? Like,
and honestly, Cora's never had a childhood. Let's keep it funky.
Yes.
Cora Cora found out very early that she was the avatar and has been adultified her entire life with the expectation of you are an avatar, you're not a human. So and often I say like when folks have gone through any adverse childhood experiences, and Ben, this from social work, like the earlier the introduction of trauma, the shorter your capacity for recovery and resilience is, and also you are stuck in an emotional arrested development. So whether or not you are 25, you mentally and emotionally are still responding like a 14-year-old.
Yes.
Because that's the start. That is when you started to learn and create these pathways for processing harm. And therefore, it is not just adult you reacting to these things. This is childhood you reacting to these things. This is teenage you reacting to these things.
Which is just inviting us all again to like ask the question when we are confronted with people who are making what seems to be bad decisions in our lives. It's why would a reasonable, rational, decent human being do this? And the answer is trauma. Because like it's probable trauma, whether they repressed or otherwise. But like, just what is a story that would allow for them to be snarky in this moment and be like, they're maybe they're hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Maybe like there are so many things that just is just inviting us to provide generous assumption. And it's so easy to forget that. It's so easy. I do it all the time.
Absolutely.
Oh gosh, I love this episode.
well, and so we are slowly running out of time, and so what are the
So good at keeping us on
kind of
track.
the last big nuggets we want to do before we take a quick break and before we jump into our back into the episode with gratitude and devotion and what pushes and pulls us away? Anything else we want to hit on from this episode specifically?
I just want to shout out as always the queen diva, Toph. We speak her name. Um, I aspire to be this elder when I grow up, just cantankerous and brazen and unapologetically me. Love that for us.
Just hanging out in the swamp in a cave, living life. Hey, stoked to be here.
Yes. Burnout.
Yep.
Just burnt out.
Here we go. All right.
I love that little line though. Like, good to see you again, Twinkle Toes. You're like,
Like that doesn't that hit you? That hits you like, oh, yeah.
Someone who
Good
sees me and
nostalgia.
remembers me before I,
Right?
yeah. Oh, so good.
Never even met him. Oh my goodness.
All right, we will jump out for a quick break, and then we'll be right back with more talk around Korra. All right, and we are back. We are talking Twee-in-Law. What is pushing us away? What is pulling us in for this episode? You can say one or the other or both. But what are those things that really pull us in or push us away from this episode?
Yes.
Yes.
I feel I wanna push myself away because of how real it feels. I want to pull myself in because of how engaging it is.
Yeah. Like, all the things.
Yeah, the ugly sobbing that was produced by rewatching this episode is something that pulled me away because wow. Yeah, I think one of the things that I think kind of pulled me in was just the earnestness of the spirit world. Like I'm always standing these little creatures. I don't know what it's about. I don't know why. They're so pure. And something about the purity and earnestness of like, hello, friend. Like they're not demonizing you. They don't have any of the outside chatter of like, you ruined Avatar because you killed the Avatar state. Like, you don't hear the fandom in the voice. You just hear purity. And I needed that. I needed soft, gentle invitation to just exist and ponder and figure it out. And I think that was probably one of the most beautiful parts of this episode was just her interaction with the spirit world and the spirit guides, being just subtle and invitational and non-judgmental, just unconditional positive regard. Love that.
Isn't it amazing how that we get so many examples of what it just looks like to be inviting and say like there's no preconceived notions like, hey, do you want some tea? We get Iro all the time. Hey, I don't know you. Let's drink some tea. Or hey, come hang in the spirit world with us. And there's nothing else that's there. It's just hey. And the ability for me to sit there and be like, hey, let's just go get dinner. Whatever. Let's just go eat. Right. Like there's such a model that is set for us on what it looks like to just invite someone in and how powerful that can be.
Yeah.
I think Korra pulls me into this episode because I think like I don't know if there's a character that can capture a generation more than Korra in the way that and acknowledging that trauma exists and acknowledging that navigating trauma is hard and still being strong and still being beautiful and worthy of love, and all of that is trapped into, and we throughout this entire series we just get to see that over and over again with Korra. And so getting to see her struggle, I think, allows a lot of other folks to be seen. And I think that just speaks to the power of this episode, but also this cartoon as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see this. Like I can't think of another cartoon that does this like this. It's like it's so good. and it's so real. And I think it's just like I'm mind blown every time I rewatch it. I forgot like how good this was until my rewatch, and I'm just like, oh my goodness.
I'll say it again. Korra's better than Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Like I honestly like I'm like, ooh.
Hard agree.
Yeah.
Hard agree. Hard agree. Hard agree.
And Last Airbender is good. Like it's so good.
It's so good, but woo,
Yeah.
my queen. My queen.
So
I'm sorry.
yeah, I one of the things that we haven't really talked about that I feel really pulled by is I really love the letter writing amongst friends. And there's a lot to be said for a handwritten note. And this world doesn't have like text and email and things along those lines. And even so, even with all of that, I guess that just makes it that much more um important, I guess. Just to have that community, to have those notes is just really beautiful, especially when Cora's not writing back, right? Like it's really lovely. And I'm just like, oh, I hope that I can remember that. And who needs a note right now? Like that's what like it's reminding me, inviting me into that.
Well, and even just the moment of like, I don't know what to write. So the weather's nice. It's currently
Oh,
this time at this day.
yes.
Like, it's just connection still. And so even though it doesn't always have to be this eloquent, thought out,
Yeah.
wonderfully dictated connection piece, sometimes it can just be like, yeah, the weather was
I'm
cool, but
thinking of you.
I'm thinking of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Ugh. And then
Yeah.
I don't know that I felt too pushed away. I there are certainly like I don't like I don't love that like Cora's going through all this pain, but like at the same time that's what was precisely what was pulling me in. What and it's hard because I guess I love Toph too, and I also struggle with Toph, right?
Mhm.
The cantankerousness is one of those things where I'm like, oh, that's so you, and I'm like, is this the way? And so I don't know, I wonder about that, and so I don't know that it pushes me away, but it makes me think.
Toph would
Oh,
never be my mentor or coach by
mhm.
choice. That's not my learning style.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, Toph, as much as I love Toph and I was like very excited, it definitely was a little bit of a push away because Toph to me represents burnout. Like just
yeah,
it's just and being a therapist in this age and seeing so many of our like colleagues and professional people being so burnt out, it just reminded me of what it's like to be a mental health professional at this day and age, and how we are, how sometimes our rigidity can be a barrier, um and sometimes it can be a help, right? But something just I all I saw was burnout, and I was like, "Ooh, this is gonna be a rough couple of episodes of trying to translate this experience."
Yeah, my one push away, I think, and it's not because it's not real, and it's not because it's not uh like warranted, is the snapping at Katara, and and the reason I think that's a push away for me is because when I do that, that is a signal to me that something's not right. And also, those types of moments in my life are probably the ones that give me the most shame and regret, and so witnessing that is very real, and at the same time is like I almost feel so much like regret for Korra in that moment. Um, but it's just, and I think that's just because when if I do those things, it's just an overwhelming feeling of shame ends up popping up. So, um, but very real.
oh, we did it. Okay. Oh,
Let's jump to devotion. Water is the element that we are looking through recovery, and so, um,
here for water.
what is your thing? What is your weekly goal or in regards to the lens of recovery and the element of water?
Yeah. Um, this episode has caused me to reflect on what is poisoning my wells. Um, I have been navigating some just regular processing of like, care and kind of doing some inventory work. I'm coming up on as I come closer to a trauma anniversary, I find myself being more pensive. And so had something that recently has triggered, elements of my PTSD. And so one of the things that I've been called to reflect on, right, is like what are the things that have poisoned the wells of like things that I find sustainable. And so being in flow with myself and understanding that so that I'm not fighting these things that are coming up for me, but actually understanding them and making meaning and embracing these aspects of my story so that I can still be in flow and in movement with my life. So some reflective work, a lot of recovery work of reclaiming. I'm in my extra nerd era. We are watching anime, we are watching D&D campaigns, we are reclaiming certain narratives that I've told myself I couldn't do because of, trying to be considered desirable. I am leaning fully into my nerd era.
Join me.
As I am,
Welcome.
yes, as I also am entering in what I call my glass era, which is I am delicate, I am breakable,
Mm.
but if you break me, I'm coming for blood. And that is a very new place to be in. How to treat people, how to teach people to treat you with care
Yeah.
and know that the lack of care has consequences now.
Mm. I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, Sunshine, what about you?
Well, it's one of the things that this episode got me thinking through. So I'm thinking of like a river, right? Something that is shaped over time and different experiences. And like a river goes in directions based off of so many factors over millions of years that have created this path that it has gone on. Um, and when things like rain happen or something that might cause like a flood, the river's going where it goes because that's the natural flow. It's not choosing to do those things. And so I think as we are talking about giving grace and lacking judgment in the way that we experience the world and the people that we're going up against, is understanding that when people are recovering, that a lot of this time it's the flow of the rivers. They are shaped by experiences. It's not a choice, right? It's not a choice to navigate. And so we can have tools that help us navigate floods better or be protected from floods or have floods not harm us. But at the same time, a flood is a flood. And so I think that recognizing that we don't need to change folks or to cure folks or to um, get mad at folks for those things or ourselves when those things happen, but recognizing that that's just a natural flow. And so I think for me, it's really checking judgment in myself, for myself, but also for the people around me, as we all navigate trauma and experiences to the best of our ability. And so that's kind of where it led me.
I love that too. Oh. I think I'm getting a little existential in my thought about water here. And I'm thinking about the water cycle and just thinking about how, also I have a glass of water here that I'm drinking from, and this is my water. And then I'm sure you have like a little water bottle, and you're drinking your water, and I'm like, that's my water. That's me, that's you. But like water's water, and when it evaporates, it's all going to join and be as one. And it's going to come back, and I will have different water, but it's still my water, but then it's still your water, but it's still water. And I'm thinking about this cycle of identity that water has, that sometimes it is liquid, sometimes it is gaseous, sometimes it's solid. It changes locations, it's constantly moving, and I'm thinking about how often I am so attached to who I am in any specific moment. And attached to what I know I can be. Like I'm seeing myself as this beautiful ice sculpture that has been crafted and cultivated, and I realize that I forget that that's gonna melt. And like unless there's a ton of energy that's keeping it that way. And I'm just like, how do I become more comfortable with being adaptable like water? How do I become more comfortable when I, break, that I will melt and that will be okay. And I will just be in a different form and I will still be water and I will still be me. Right. And how do I like learn to navigate that acceptance? And that's hard for me because I have like my whole thing is like I am constantly trying to self-improve, and I'm trying to like, how do I check that a little bit? And so that's something that I'm thinking about in response to this episode, because rather than like how do I recover, it's more like how do I realize that I don't need to, that I am and I will be, and I eventually won't be, and there we go. So I guess I think that's just going to require me to sit on that and think and really save some time specific to thinking more on it, rather than taking a specific action. I think that will be my meditative process over this.
That's so good.
Yeah, existential crisis, y'all.
A lot of reflecting going on this this week for us.
The episode demands it.
That's right. Well, let's finish up with gratitude. Who are we thankful for in this episode?
Always Spirit Dog. We love Spirit Dog. Trick me into healing. I know that's right. I have so much gratitude for that little nugget of a spirit. Oh, just so pure. Every time I'm like, oh, I think I've said at least anytime I'm on here and it's about the spirit world, I'm like, I'm just so grateful for the spirit animals. Like it's just purity. That's all I have to say. Spirit Dog.
I love it. Ben, what about you?
I Korra.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful, more than I have ever been, I think, in a prior episode for Korra, because we have a window into Korra's life here that is like, I feel better having watched this. Like I have learned, I have grown, and it's not just that from doing the podcast either. I think that when I watch this episode without the critical lens, it is very healing to watch. And I'm just really grateful for Korra, and I'm not grateful that she went through these things, but I am grateful that we got to walk with her through this experience.
It just occurred to me how much, and I don't think we lifted this up earlier, but how often she is fighting what she thinks she is fighting is not actually what she is fighting. And I feel like there's a learning in that. So not to dive in deeper, but I feel like there's certainly a learning in that throughout this episode. But she brings so much, and I think allows for a lot of us to be seen through this episode.
Yeah.
My gratitude goes to Katara. I think there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom that get dropped, and a lot of them come from Katara, whether it's the I can guide your healing process, but it's up to you, or she even so real of your body thinks you're still in danger, right? Like which you're just like, oh, like those are such real things. But my favorite part of Katara from this episode was Korra's asking questions, and Katara says, I don't know. But it's gonna be interesting to find out. But she says, I don't know. And I love when people recognize that, like, I don't know. Because I think there's some of the smartest people in the world, some of the wisest people in the world are the ones that will tell you, I don't know the answer to that. And so let's go find it out. And she does that. And so a lot of appreciation for Katara in this episode. So that's my gratitude.
Yes.
And I actually did a mini episode specifically on Katara in this a while back. So by the way, Patreon. That's still available for you. If you want to join us, BNB_pod. There's a long history of many episodes that we've put out. We also have monthly live episodes that you can join in on. We have a few recurring folks that really love to see us there. And you can find us on all the socials at BNB_pod. But Indira, if people want to find you, where do you suggest they look?
I say follow me on Twitter at Black Trauma Nerd, BALQ Trauma Nerd, all one word. Or you can go to my landing website, www.imudofia.com. I'm doing some really fun things this year. The dissertation project is going to be launched hopefully in the next month. So keep your eyes out. I'm going to be doing some fun stuff, and I'd love to dialogue with you while I'm doing it.
I want to dialogue with you too.
Check out Indira on all of the things. Please go follow her and check out all the wonderful work she is doing and they're doing. All right. Coming up, more episodes as we navigate more Korra.
That's right.
So much to navigate. All right, y'all. I'm Sunshine.
I'm Ben.
And this has been Bending Not Breaking. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.